Recording.
Ready to go? Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you here. Welcome, councillors. The roll call has been taken.
Yes.
Kate, thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest on any items of the agenda? None. There's no presentation or delegations. We have two items for consideration. One is 4.1 City of Brantford Site Plan Control, Site Alteration, Security Release Process Review. Could we have lengthened that out a little bit?
Yeah.
For 20, sorry, I couldn't manage it. 2022-343. So with that, Joshua, you have a presentation for us. So would you kindly proceed, please?
So while Josh is pulling up the presentation, I'll just give a brief
overview.
Okay. Yep, and sort of a status update. And sort of, you know what, it's funny you mentioned the title because it's not fancy, but it's really what we've been doing a deep dive of the last several months. So since the last meeting of the task force, which occurred back in February, it seems so long ago really at this point, but back in February, a lot's happened with respect to DAP implementation that we've been working on as a staff team. And it really is much of a team effort. And that's why you can see so much staff here today, because everybody's had a hand in the work that we've done and the review and the recommendations that we're bringing forward. And there's actually a lot of staff that aren't here today that have also had a hand in that. And so just as a quick overview, if you recall back in February, the task force made a recommendation to council to enter into a transfer payment agreement with the province of Ontario for funding in the range of $1.6 million. And that was to assist municipalities with implementing their DAP implementation work plans. We were in a really good position because at that point in time, we had actually already prepared a work program and identified as sort of a threat to that work plan was that we were, lacking capacity, lacking resources, and lacking funding. So the money came through at a really good time. And then we were able to provide a very detailed work plan to the province as part of that agreement. That work plan really built off of the work plan that we had already provided to this task force, but it really focused on the resourcing and the capacity issues in order to implement that work plan. That work plan, we're actually happy to say, was approved on June the 6th. And so we now have a provincial approval in order to implement the projects that we had identified through that work program. So work is underway with that. And actually the second report on the agenda is directly related to that DAP implementation funding, where we're going to talk about a pilot program for a planning committee. Before we jump into the site plan and site alteration and security release review, just also a quick update with respect to Cloud Permit. So Cloud Permit, as you know, is our technology solution. It's going to be sort of the e-portal or e-permitting and online portal, as well as an internal tracking and workflow tool. And so this will help us to move to basically what we're projecting to be in and around a 90 to 95% online customer service base, still recognizing that we do have, that 5% of our customer base that still comes into the counter and wants to have service in that way. And so we're happy to say that the contracts have been executed with Cloud Permit, and just last week we had our first kickoff meeting. I will say that while I am very excited about Cloud Permit and what it's going to do for planning and development engineering, we are kicking it off in the building department first. So I feel a bit like I'm stealing the CBO's thunder, but I'm just very excited for the capabilities of this tool. So it will roll out in the building department first. And then it's almost a bit of a, let's ensure that the technology is the promise and it delivers what it's basically promised. And so we're working with the building department. And through that process, we're also looking at a rollout strategy for how we will roll this out to the development community. And really the ways that we will do that is I think through the site plan, site alteration, and security release process, we've reestablished as a new corporate team interested in DAP improvements, clear sort of connections with the development community. And so we've already indicated to them that the work that we're doing is really phase one. There is a lot more to come. Yeah. And I really want to keep this group engaged. So we will likely go back out to that group, as well as kick off almost a marketing communications type campaign as well. So that brings us to the item on the agenda, which is 4.1, the site plan, site alteration and security release process. Since our last task force meeting, we presented a plan as well as received direction from yourself through a NOM to really deep dive into this process, because we recognize it's one of the most significant pain points for staff as well as the development community. And there was a lot of improvements that we felt that could be made, but we really wanted to do that in consultation jointly with the development community, because if it only works for us and it doesn't work for them, that really doesn't solve the problem. So we held industry workshops throughout the month of May. They were very well attended. We met with the Home Builders Association, developers in the city, both large scale and small scale developers. And we also met with the Home Builders Association, BRIA, and we have a meeting with the chamber as well, July the 6th. We weren't unfortunately able to make that before this meeting, but any recommendations or input that we received through that, we will then present that as an update to council when this report goes forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Josh, and he's going to walk you through the 3 sectors that we looked at and key recommendations that we are proposing for each of those sectors. We've cut it down to a short 10 minutes. So lots of room for questions.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And that's a great overview. And I think the good news out of that was the amount of interest from our local construction developer community. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, so thank you, Nicole, and welcome again, everybody. My name is Joshua Scram. I'm an intermediate long-range planner with the City of Brantford. So as outlined by Nicole at the outset of this presentation, Planning and Development Services have undertaken a review of the City of Brantford's site plan, site alteration, and security release processes. And then in addition to review of Brantford's relevant bylaws, a comparative best practice analysis was completed for surrounding municipalities, focusing on site plan control, site alteration, and security release. Sorry, I'm just trying to navigate here, multiple screens around Joe. So as mentioned by Nicole, in addition to internal consultation with technical staff, Planning and Development Services also consulted with members of the local development community and industry representatives. And as mentioned, staff also plan to meet with the Chamber of Commerce on July 6th. So getting into the recommendations, looking at a summary of the recommended improvements, I'll start by speaking to site plan control and site alteration. The first recommended improvement is that staff amend site plan control bylaw 90-2018 in order to remove automatic application for any development on a lot created by consent, approved by the Committee of Adjustment, sorry. So looking at comparative municipalities during our review, Brantford remains one of, if not the only municipalities we reviewed that requires site plan control for all lots created through a decision Committee of Adjustment. So although our site plan bylaw, like many other municipalities, exempt certain forms of low density residential development, currently we require that lots created through a decision of Committee of Adjustment really go through that site plan control process. And therefore we have several infill singles that are subject to site plan control. I'll also highlight that with the removal of site plan control for all lots created by a decision Committee of Adjustment, right, that previous kind of automatic broad approach, the current site plan control bylaw does contain a provision which allows opportunity for planning staff and the Committee of Adjustment to apply site plan control on an application by application basis, right? So I think one of the important things is, you know, where additional review may be needed to achieve that attractive, functional, and safe development, this provision of the bylaw creates an opportunity for planning staff and the committee to build it in as a condition of the committee's decision where appropriate, and again, on a case-by-case basis. The next recommended improvement includes opportunity to scope and customize development agreements. So updating the site plan control bylaw in order to remove that provision, which requires site plan control for any development on a lot created by a decision Committee of Adjustment, it really changes and removes requirements for most site plan agreements as it relates to residential infill development. So, you know, as a result, we have a standardized agreement for residential infill that would really no longer be needed. And therefore, if we do have future infill development subject to site plan control, we should really look at agreements to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis and should look at the potential for scope or customized agreements. Staff also recommend updating site plan control procedural guidance documents and the creation of a Developing in Brantford webpage. With the exception of only a few documents, access to the City of Brantford site plan control procedural documents are currently very difficult to access by members of the development community. And then with the creation of a developing in Brantford webpage comes portal functionality that it's really specific to building and planning and development and engineering services that provides a consolidated, really a one-stop shop resource for the development community as it relates to site plan, site alteration, and security release processes. And then lastly, in terms of site alteration, planning and development services staff in consultation with building operations and legal services will update the City of Brantford site alteration bylaw 28-2011, reporting back in the fourth quarter of this year. Just a quick summary, the site alteration updates will address the removal of requirements for permits for pools, sheds, concrete slabs, some of those more private backyard matters that the department is trying to refocus our resources on development, outside of those, right? And then the removal of static and dated permit fees listed in the bylaw, and then a possible shift of responsibilities for bylaw enforcement as well. And then something that, the department has been implementing currently, but site alteration requirements to be removed from site plan control applications, really, identifying that overlapping redundancy that's not needed, and then proper enforcement of dumping related issues. So now looking at recommendations as it relates to site plan control securities, the first recommendation is that staff review and amend the current site plan agreement security posting formula. So first would be 50% of the approved cost estimate for all site works up to a maximum of 500,000 or less at the discretion of planning and development services staff. And then 100% of the approved cost estimate for all offsite works to be approved as securities for site plan, subject to development engineering review. Currently, Brantford does not set a maximum, right? So setting a maximum dollar amount, it really varied from municipality to municipality in our review of this approach. And staff concluded that each municipality really set different values based on factors that are specific to their related development processes. The next recommendation outlines that planning and development services staff in consultation with finance and legal services further investigate the use and application of surety bonds in the development process and report back in the fourth quarter of this year on a potential policy for the use of surety bonds as a form of financial security. With the exception of only a few municipalities, surety bonds remain relatively new in terms of posting method in Ontario. So the surety bonding method, although becoming comparable to letters of credit, it's still fairly new. This component of, ready on-demand surety, it's only been in place for a short time frame. So, they've not been subject to municipal drawdown, nor have they been clearly interpreted by the court system when compared to letters of credit and certified checks. So in terms of more recent updates on this and some of the work that our team is doing, legal staff aim to meet with our insurance underwriting professionals to review the language of bonding agreements that are currently available, and then also review detailed case law. And then lastly, planning and development services staff recommend updating the site plan security release process to really streamline departmental site visits, to have one division and in some instances, one individual completing site visits. Currently, if you look at our process on a more macro level, we have one department, but really two divisions, planning and engineering, completing site visits alongside each other. And so we want to look at opportunities to take advantage of the new technical expertise that we have in our new staff complement. And then I think also along with that comes the opportunity to establish seasonal timelines for when site inspections can be requested by applicants through this new one window approach that Nicole had mentioned. And this process is really in place in order to schedule inspections and streamline that review process. And then the one window process will also increase transparency regarding the status of applications during different stages of development. And so that's a really quick and brief, compact summary of all the work that we've been doing. But with that, I'll hand it back over to Nicole just to speak to some items on next steps.
We've got a couple of questions, if you don't mind. At this point, Mayor Davis and then Councillor Sless.
Thank you, Chair Utley, and through you to, I guess, Joshua. Thanks, Joshua. Very thorough report. But a couple of questions for you. So if it's an infill development and someone doesn't need a severance, i.e. they've got a lot that's already existing, when do they have to undergo site plan control? Like if they're doing what, a single family, no site plan, a duplex, a triplex, but when is site plan control triggered for development that doesn't require severance or committee of adjustment approval?
So I think through the chair, in instances where site plan control could be applicable, really, again, it's on a case-by-case basis. So with the removal of the current provision in the bylaw, and planning staff and the committee of adjustment having an opportunity to put it in as a condition, if that's what I understand, there could be instances where it has proximity to a core natural area, or there might be an opportunity where, there's been certain site elements where it's like, we would like to have this reviewed further. And then, through Joe and his team and Nicole, there might be an opportunity to say, well, this should actually go through site plan control. We need to have another look at this. And so again, it's that case by case basis. I don't think that ultimately the goal is that we push it through for site plan control automatically. With removal of that provision, we now have the opportunity to really look at opportunities to not push it through that process. But if there is a core natural feature, that it's adjacent to, or there's elements of the site that need further review or, additional consultation, then maybe site plan control is the appropriate avenue. And then staff will bring that forward through the recommendations of the committee. And then the committee has an opportunity to add that in as a condition of the decision.
Right, what I'm getting at though is the development application that doesn't require committee of adjustment approval, right? Because it doesn't require severance and it otherwise complies with all the provisions or bylaws, but they still got to apply for a building permit. In the current system, when do they have to undergo site plan control?
Sorry, maybe I'll defer to Joe here, but are you talking just about in terms of sequencing?
Well, when there's some developments that don't need to go through site plan control.
Right.
Right, they're exempt. So just what's the standard right now? When is it triggered?
So it goes through site plan control as a condition as soon as it's applicable. So the building department would know this lot needs to go through consent, therefore site plan control is applicable automatically.
Okay, but Joshua, that's not my question. My question is, if it doesn't have to go to the committee of adjustment, when is site plan control triggered? Is it never triggered if it's infill, or is it triggered because of the size and scope of the project?
Through the chair, Joe Muno, manager of development planning. Mayor Davis, the only time it would be triggered is because of the current provision or clause in the site plan control bylaw. Us proposing this would eliminate that. And let's just say there was a vacant lot currently within the city boundaries. No site plan control would be applicable because that lot was not created previously, or recently, I should say, through the committee of adjustment process.
Okay.
So right now, if they go into the building department for a single family home on a lot that was not created through consent, then site plan control would not apply to that build.
All right, and what if they're putting up an apartment building?
So through the site plan control bylaw, that's when we're talking about, it basically identifies provisions in that bylaw that stipulate when site plan control. So the entire area or boundary of the municipality is subject to site plan control. And basically the medium mixed density or industrial is subject to, they're all subject to site plan control. The only caveat that's built into the site plan control bylaw is when there is a minor addition. And if the addition is minor enough, which is minor is defined by 10, I believe 10% in the bylaw. If it's not bigger than 10% of the existing GFA, then site plan control would not apply to that commercial and institutional or residential, multi-residential build.
My next question is entirely unrelated. It has to do with pools. And so if I understand correctly, what we're being told is there'd no longer be a requirement to apply for a permit, a special pool permit. And I understand that to reduce red tape, et cetera. But how are you going to deal with, because there are pool projects, and I've seen them both as a lawyer and as a member of council, where the person is changing the way stormwater flows off the property, or they're building up the grading to be able to do an in-ground pool. How do you deal with that? So something that'll have an impact on surrounding lots.
Through the chair to Mayor Gary Peaver, manager of development engineering. that is a part of this process. We are looking into that. That would be a part of the update coming in Q4 of how we would handle that. There's some ideas that we still need a pool permit for safety reasons to check the fence and items like that, that review could be done at that time. So we are looking to potentially still be a part of the pools and having an inspector out there. However, that's something we're looking to still redefine when we come back later this year.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, if I could add one more
Please.
for Mayor Davis there.
Yep.
Single detached builds will also be subject to site plan if they are within a former landfill area, which is also identified in the mapping of the site plan control bylaw.
Thank you, Joe.
Can I
Thank you, Mayor Davis.
Can I add
Anything else?
something? Yeah, I just wanted to continue to Mayor Davis's comment around the site alteration. And I just wanted to provide some clarity that we fully recognize that these types of developments or small builds still require an approval permitting process. But right now, what we find is that the level of effort and the cross coordination between the departments, the development engineering group, as well as the building department group, there's too much overlap there, and it creates a lot of confusion and frustration with the development community or the single family homeowner who wants to put in a pool because they don't quite understand why they need to go through building. They also need to go through site alteration. So what we're suggesting is that there's likely an opportunity here to strip back some of the components of the site alteration bylaw, which we're looking at, and move some of that function to potentially the building department or others, because it makes sense from a streamlined perspective that the customer should be coming in and having a single point of review and permitting process versus having them go through building, go through site alteration. And so we're not looking to necessarily eliminate. We're just looking to sort of redefine and reestablish who's responsible for doing that work, and can we not make that easier for the customer? Okay, so I just wanted to provide that clarity. We're not looking to strip back all of those requirements of the site alt. We're just looking to see if, are these matters being captured somewhere else, or could they be? And does that make sense? Very similar to the securities release, right? We don't need 4 staff on a site investigating for a security
Absolutely
release.
right.
We need 1,
Yeah.
and the developer should deal with 1 point of contact, not 4. And that's where the frustration on their end comes. Okay, so I just wanted to provide that clarity.
It has to be frustrating for us.
It's frustrating for them, and it's frustrating
Yeah.
internally, right? So we get that.
Thank you, Nicole. Mayor Davis, you okay? Good, okay, Councillor Sluss, and then Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going back to the securities, I think we're talking now about a maximum of 500,000 as a security. Correct me if I'm wrong, is the county not 250?
So through the chair, that's correct, Councilor Celeste, it is 250 in the county.
Now how does that work? Now that we're also talking about if it's internal, it's a maximum of 500. If it's external security, then it's 100%. Correct?
That's correct. Yes, 100% for external offsite.
Yes,
work. That's correct.
So in the county, does that 250 that they require, does that include internal and external?
I believe that the county has separate external works agreements, but we can confirm that. I believe that it's structured separately. And yeah, so it's 250 for on-site. And then I believe similar to several municipalities that we reviewed, it's 100% for off-site, but we can confirm that for you.
Okay. I'm just wondering, do we have any knowledge of the success rate in the county? Like we're holding double what they're holding. Are we being overcautious? Like at 250, are they running into trouble where they're being left, hung out to dry, so to speak?
Cool. Did you want to add something here?
I just wanted to ask that we haven't had what we did through our review, and actually there's an appendices in the report which shows an overview of several municipalities that we looked at that have a maximum rate. And so you can see it really does vary across, different municipalities and then what they're comfortable with respect to the value of that work and ensuring that we have appropriate security. One of the things that we heard pretty clearly from the development community was, yes, there's definitely a push and a desire to move away from LCs to move to the surety bond. And it wasn't necessarily the value of what the concern was. So whether it was 250, 300, or 500, that wasn't necessarily the concern. Overall, the concept of the LC is the problem to begin with, but it was more that they want to know going into it, what's the maximum I'm going to be tied to holding? And that right now, we don't have a clarity in our process that says, so when a development community or a developer is looking to do their finance and their pro forma for their project, this way they're able to clearly define what exactly they're going to have to post with that security. That's what we heard more was they want consistency, not necessarily that we didn't hear from anybody that it has to be the same as the county. They just wanted to know that when they're going in and they're doing their project, they can accurately finance and price out the cost of that project to finance it. So that was more of the discussion of what we got from the industry.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that clarity. Nicole, the other one is the release itself. I forget the terminology. To me, what was lacking in there was a maximum timeline. We don't really discuss that. I forget now how it was put. But it's not, I don't know how to put it. Like I've heard stories where like securities were held up for 2-3 years for various reasons. Some our fault, some their fault. Everybody, I guess, shared some of the blame. What I was hoping to see was something where we say, listen, when the work is completed, within a defined time period, securities will be released. Is that boxing us in too much?
So through the chair, I think there's a couple of things that can really speak to that in our review. And I think in addition to the process mapping that was provided as an appendix, we have some timelines that have been identified that are goals and our milestones. And I think that in terms of, the outward facing kind of milestones that the applicant would work through in terms of getting us those certified professional sign-offs, and then really starting our site plan review. I think with the one window permitting program and this online application tool, it allows some transparency for not just the applicant, but for staff to really see where things sit so they can understand, in terms of the goals and the timelines that they want to achieve, where things are at. Well, you know what? Right now, something is actually currently sitting with you and your professional teams to get the professional certifications, or no, it's with city staff in our review to go out now and complete that, site visit where we have one staff member going out and tackling that through some of the streamlined processes that we've identified. So in that appendices, we do have some, procedures that outline timelines, but I think this new online one window approach does offer some transparency. So the questions around, well, it's sitting with you, no, it's sitting with us, becomes more of like a team atmosphere where we're moving things through a process together, right?
Okay, yeah. As long, I guess my concern is at the end of this process that we have one that doesn't create aggravation and a lot of infighting with developers screaming to get their money back and they can't get it back and they got another project, but we're tying things up and they can't move forward. And that's, I guess, the kind of situation I'm trying to, in my mind, avoid and have policies and procedures in place that won't allow that to happen.
Yeah, to the chair, if I may add, it's Gary here. The release of securities is a pretty large task to complete. There are some very nuances when it comes to the process. One of the items that we've even looked at with letter of credits is that it's actually the original copy of paper that has to be released back to the bank. And that process is very kind of archaic at the moment, but that's really processed by the bank itself. So we're really tied to that. And it is a bit of a time waster that we do have to deal with. So a part of this process too is we're getting better at the following up with the developer, say, we've released back to your bank and here's the information, right? So we've done our part and we're done at our end. So that really ties back to where Josh was going, saying everyone's going to know where it is. Whose hands is it in? Is it in the city's hands or is it in our hands? And so when we send that release off, the developer will get that notification saying, we've released, it's off of our plate. Now you're gonna have to go chase your bank down because there could be a 2-week processing time on their end before your funds are released. So, for us, it's really important to close that loop with the developer saying where it's at, where the request is at, when we've completed the inspection and we've deemed the release either complete or needs another review.
Okay. And just one further, if I could, and I'll use an example. Everything has been complied with by the developer to get their money released, except the landscaping. But it's January and you can't inspect it until the spring to make sure that everything there is live. I get that. But the entire security is held up waiting for the snow to melt so that somebody can go and say, yep, those plants are all alive, it's okay. Is there a way to phase that so that if the landscape portion is $50,000 and we're holding $500,000, they can get the $450,000 back right away because everything has been complied with, but it's being held up by one item that can't be dealt with because of circumstances nobody can control. Is there a way to do that?
Sure. So I can jump in, Councillor, through the chair. So our process is actually phased. And that's actually an interesting point too, is because it was something that we wanted to ensure through this process in our review that are we doing things consistently like other municipalities across the board? And really, we didn't find a change. Everybody, for the most part, does what is generally a 50%, a 40%, so that takes you to 90%, and then you hold that last 10% for any remaining works. And oftentimes it is things like landscaping that get held for that last 10%. The challenge that we face is that we are responsible to the corporation. While it seems like landscaping is not a major issue, when you have an approved plan in place and that landscaping has a component of function to it, like it's a buffer, we want to ensure that it's planted appropriately and that it's there and it's going to do the job that we intended it to do when we approved the plan. One of the concerns that we face and what we don't have at the city and what other municipalities have are seasonal windows. So what we do is we actually say that the security release process will happen from the spring to the fall, that we're not accepting security release process through the winter months because there isn't a way for us to technically inspect. Or we consider alternatives where you may be subject to that last 10% through that service, through that seasonal window, right? And one of the conversations that we had in this industry workshop, which was interesting because it really wasn't adversarial. There was a lot of really good conversation. We talked about, and this is sort of Joe's analogy, that it's a dance, right? The municipality works with the developer. So we can tell you what we think are issues that need improvement, but we can only control the part that we can control. We clearly recognize that our internal back-end process needs work. There's way too many hands in the pot. There's not a lot of circling back to the developer. Those are things that we can all fix to provide that clarity in the process. But we have to understand that a lot of the developers that complain for sort of this room only, they don't build according to their plan. And then they ask us to release their security. That process will never be fixed through a process improvement if they continue to build in a non-accordance with their plan. So I think we have to recognize what we can control and what they are responsible for controlling and clearly set our expectations. Right now, the expectation isn't clear. That's what this process is going to improve, is clearly define what our expectation is. Because right now, it's a bit all over the map. And they call 5 different people, and that's where the frustration comes. That's the part that we want to clarify.
That's great.
And I would also add to Nicole. Nicole spoke to the seasonal timelines, which I think is a big element, right? You know, in comparison to other municipalities that might be a little bit more smaller in size and that are structured differently in terms of their development and review process. I think when you have seasonal timelines for review, it's quite clear when you can submit a request. And then staff are also taking advantage of those growing seasons, right? Whether it's the spring and fall, and obviously those are going to change a little bit within different seasons, but being able to take advantage of that season to actually comment on a process where the applicant wants to see a response as opposed to holding it. And then I think in terms of some additional tools with the online element and developing in Brantford webpage becomes, physical tools and calculators, the potential to look at calculators to assist applicants through a process where they're identifying how fees are calculated, right? So if it is this huge chunk that is landscaping, you can see how, as Nicole said, maybe that is the 10%. Maybe that's accounted differently, and maybe that drawdown when staff are reviewing it, because there has been a, a program or a calculator to assist them in determining their costs. Well, that can be reviewed and then released in a certain structure that is more beneficial, but follows that 50, 40, 10%.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carpenter, thanks for your patience.
Thank you. And great segue, Nicole. Thank you very much about builders not always building what they say they're going to build. You can see behind me, there's a set of plans in the corner of my office, and that's a development on Gray Street where the builder is not building what those plans say he's supposed to build, like a sound barrier wall and the fencing and so forth amongst the neighbors. We'll have a discussion about that later, but that's very well to the point that they, even the larger corporations, put in plans and then change them at their will. And in fact, this developer is telling the residents that he's only putting a fence up. He's not putting up any wall to protect the ground, but that's not the case in the plans. Anyways, good point there. In the site plan inspections, this one window, I want to question that. One window will also mean that a developer puts in for a return of his funds. The timeline will be in the one window. Like when he puts that in the one window, that's when the clock starts ticking. And then will there be a time when that property then is inspected?
That is our internal goal. So it's another good segue because it leads us to the functionality of the cloud permit process. So right now, an inspection request will come into sometimes the planner on the file. Most often it's the planner on the file. Sometimes it comes in direct through development engineering. And sometimes it does sit in an inbox. And this is a problem, right? And so through our cloud permit e-permitting tool, absolutely, like that program can be configured that as soon as we were to receive a request that it would go to an all users mailbox, we can configure it on the back end that it goes to the appropriate staff who are managing the security release process and inspections. And with that, you can also set sort of internal timelines. This isn't a Planning Act matter in terms of timelines, but like with respect to a Planning Act application, you can actually set the deadlines right into cloud permit. So it's triggering those responses. So if we set an internal clock where we say our internal goal, let's say we're going to measure is 8 weeks from the time that we get the request to we're sending somebody out to do an inspection, we can actually measure that through our cloud permit system to see where we're actually hitting. And that's an important point because before we actually set those metrics, I do think it's important that we actually measure our current baseline performance and then set what that metrics will be. Right now, all of that is manual. Cloud permit will help to achieve what our baseline is, what our goal is. I don't want to say our goal is 8 weeks if we're doing 16 weeks or more. That's unrealistic expectation. But that's part of what that cloud permit system will help us to do is track that internally. And those can be our performance indicators for an annual review.
Yeah, I really like that concept and where you're going there. Will the same be in the process? I'm looking at the full site plan procedural map that I printed off. It'll stay on my wall now. I just want to so I can, if I have a discussion with developers, I can see where they are. That timeline that's on there, will we be held to those timelines? Like a lot of times we have the difficulty, and sometimes it's because we're short-staffed or whatever it might be, getting the review process back. Will we put ourselves to a similar scope of timeline like that somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually doing that internally as a separate but interconnected process. And that relates back to the new timelines that will be implemented as a result of Bill 109 coming into effect in January. The province has established new timelines for site plan applications as well as zoning and official plan amendments and some changes as well to the draft plan process as well. So moving forward, we will have to establish appropriate timelines in accordance with that new legislation. And we'll have to look at, opportunities for improvement if we're not making those timelines.
Well, that mean as well, then when we're looking at our costs, will you be coming to council if you're short-staffed, if you need people, if you're not able to make timelines because of staffing issues, a number of applications coming through? Will we look at a reserve account for some of the funding so that we can, if we need to have extra staff, we've got an account there, those kinds of things we need to look at?
Absolutely.
Holistic approach.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenges is where we recognize we're at is a lot of that information that we come to is anecdotal. And I think, and right now we don't have an internal tracking tool. The other part of that tool will also track the performance of the development industry itself. So right now, while the provincial legislation doesn't have a stop clock mechanism built into it, one of the things that we often talk about is that while the municipality, like how long is the municipality actually in control of an application? And how long is the development community in control of an application? When the development community comes forward and they say, well, I've taken 3 years to get an approval, but you had it for 1.5 years. So really the municipality's performance is 1.5 years, not 3 years. I think that that's an important metric that needs to be assessed as well. And that will help to inform our operating budgets in the future as well, because we'll clearly have that data to present.
And the connectivity between engineering and planning, I mean, because that's all part of the process. How are we going to improve that?
Well, I think I think in lots of ways, I think it's just the fact that we're all here today is a clear improvement. And this is, as I said, when I opened this meeting, this has really been a joint work effort between, and we are no longer planning and engineering, we are planning and development services. We are fully committed to, we've already looked at the reorganization and the staffing changes. That was sort of phase 1. Then we looked at our own internal processes. That's phase 2. And then you'll hear in the next report, now we're branching out to look at DAP improvements across the corporation. Because we've said early on, we can throw lots of resources and improvements into the front end, into planning. But if we can't move the applications through the complete cycle, we haven't actually improved our process, right? And so that's why we're seeing a strong investment in development engineering to raise capacity there. You're seeing improvements in building because they're a key player. And now in our next report, you'll see some improvements we're proposing in clerk services.
Oh, that's
Just Archie.
If I can, Nicole's doing a very good job playing the role as director, GM, and CEO at the moment. She's doing an excellent job in answering these questions. She's just answered my question, but to Councilor
Doing a
Gregory,
much better job than you are.
we just to Nicole and planning teams. I mean, we did the official plan, which many planners, as you know, this is a career thing they've done, and Nicole's done that. We're now doing bylaw changes, which is a huge initiative. Plus, in addition to that, we've got this whole DAP development application for which you're hearing about today. We've done some reorganization changes under Heidi DeVries' leadership and Nicole's leadership, bring development engineering over, and you hear Joshua and Joe and everybody and Gary talking about how they're all working together, reducing duplication and looking for continuous improvement here. It's all coming together, lots of work, but I'm keeping in Heidi DeVries, as we talk about this regular at our one-on-ones every week, where we're keeping a close eye on planning and making sure they have the proper amount of staff. And if they don't, we'll bring a report to HR committee, because even in that add on the 27 hectares in the northern boundary as well as all the other things going on. So lots of things going on, but we are keeping a close eye, and you're right for the reserves too, Councilor Carpenter. Thank you.
And I just want to add that this is a really good thing we're doing here. I mean, this is really tremendous what we're doing. We were ahead of the curve before the province. So I'm happy that that's happening. At the end of the day, when we get this process done, and because the public meetings have been going great. I went to some of the public meetings. Are fantastic, by the way. The way we're doing things here, I think, when at the end of the day, we will have a Chamber of Commerce in the building industry. We should have some kind of a celebration so that we can economic development. It's a huge economic development tool for us going forward, and certainly Councilor Utley with the process improvements. He's got to be as pleased as punch about how we're doing this improvement process, and then we should be celebrating that. I mean, we too often don't celebrate the great things we're doing. And this is a really fantastic thing we're doing. We're eliminating a lot of red tape. We're still protecting the municipality, and we're ready for this building boom that's going to happen north of Powerline Road by doing this. So I'm pleased. One last question though: the $1.3 million funded by the province. Will we get a breakdown of how that's being spent at one point? I'm not in a rush for it now, but just at the end of the day, will we see how that's being spent and where the money went?
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of a few weeks ago, actually, Heidi DeVries had sent out I don't know why I said DeVries. Heidi had sent out an information update, and attached to that was an appendix which outlined the provincial work plan that we provided to the province. As I said earlier on, the provincial work plan really is just the detailed description of the resources required to implement the larger DAP implementation work plan. So that is there, and we can commit to bringing some of that information back as maybe even a progress report in the fall when we meet again with this committee. I think it's been a tremendous work, staff working with this committee and to move these issues and initiatives along, and it's been a tremendous amount of support. So I think what we can do is we can definitely bring some financial information back to see how we've actually implemented and spent that money, and if there's any challenges at that time, we can talk about that then.
No, thank you very much. And I know that this program has really shone the light on some of our up and coming leadership people in the planning departments and in any other departments as well. So I just wanted to thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Before we go to second time, I've got a few questions. One you already answered partially, Nicole, and that was how will we measure our success, and that's built into the process and the software program from what I understand. How will that information be shared with our business community?
Yeah, I think one of the things
that's
it is
really important.
It is key, and
Yeah.
because in my view, I think it also sets the stage for more regular discussion. And
Yeah.
that was sort of a key theme that we had in these industry workshops. As we said, there's a lot of new staff, a lot of new players around the table. We're having new developers come to the city of Brampton. Often we're seeing changes in old companies that have been here for a really long time. And we sort of premise that by saying, this is really the first of many initiatives, and we really want to encourage ongoing conversation, because again, to me, we're not doing a great job if we're not working with our customer, and vice versa. So I think that reporting on those metrics is really important, but it also shines the light on how we're doing and improvements that we're prepared to make. And it also shines the light on where there may be some problems in the development community that should also be addressed to improve those problems. For example, the timelines associated with applications, right? So you can't come back to the municipality and say, we held up your development approval, when clearly it's showing that, things were in your hands for longer than ours, right? It also is a tool for further discussions at the provincial level, whether it's through the mayor and AMO and other councillors, where it also will look at things like commenting agencies. So how long is it taking for MTO comments, let's say, CN comments, GRCA input? These are important parts of and elements of our process, which is really important. I'd like to consider an annual report. I think that something like that will be useful. I think we're a while away. We're still in the building and implementation phase, but ultimately when we've established what our performance is, and then we set indicators for where we want to improve, we should be reporting to show, have we stayed true to our word? And if not, why? And how can we make improvements for future, right? I think that those are important elements, thinking about that.
We're quite often on the defensive. And I think with this information, we can go a lot more proactive in communicating to the community that, this is the truth. These are the facts.
These are the facts.
And want to present this balanced information to you, and maybe that would trigger businesses and developers to clean up their act a little bit as well. And another one is the archaic banking system. I've made a note to myself to contact a business manager with RBC to say, just have a talk to her, very frank discussion. So that's wonderful. You answered two of my questions. Will there be a need to educate, once we've got the system online, with the building department, how will we educate, how will we impart that information to the business community?
Yeah, we've had those discussions. We're starting those discussions now, since, as I said, I agree with you. To me, this is a complete revolution in terms of how we do business, how we conduct business. And as I said earlier, like we are, this is moving to 95% of online customer service e-permitting tool, right? We've never done this before. One of the benefits of the e-permitting process, or the cloud permit program, is it is quite streamlined. And there are a lot of benefits that to the developer or the development community outside of those to the municipality. So for example, the development community, all they need to do is register for an account. They can log in and they will see all of their permits in all of Ontario where they're working. So this is quite a different, it's not just linked because it's on the cloud, right? It's not just based on the information that they see through this process will actually give them a really good picture across multiple corporations where they're working. So that's really interesting. And so we have talked about a rollout strategy. We will definitely work with Maria to do that because there is a bit of an education there. And we do have to continue to accept applications in person through, a customer service counter. But ideally, more and more, we will move to that process. And we have a responsibility to prompt the development community to use the software once we have it up and running.
Josh?
I would also add to Nicole's comment, I think in review of comparative municipalities and some of the websites that kind of jumped out at us, and I think obviously working with Maria and her team, but like I think the biggest kind of eye catch was these websites were really streamlined. Like if it was site plan control, you went to the website, site plan control is applicable based on X, Y, and Z. Okay, I know, as opposed to maybe some of the current processes where some of our documents are a little more difficult to access, or you maybe have to contact staff, right? So taking those elements out and allowing the user a more, easily accessible, we talked about a one-stop shop where the process that you need to go through and what you need to achieve your outcome, which is, key to development. So I think that simplifying the websites and what we saw out there, whether it was Kitchener or Guelph, and those really easy, I think that, as planners and as technical experts, sometimes we think, oh, all this information is very beneficial to us, but you also have to understand that a streamlined opportunity to understand yes, no, okay, and I move on to the next step, right? So.
Thank you, Josh. I think I have one more question, and that is, you talked about one point of contact for the customer. If I had my preference, I'd say that person should be in economic development because they have the most contact with the customer and also a lot of contact with all the different departments. And I don't know, I'm just throwing that out as my idea, and I don't know who that should be. But I would hope that there will be some good conversation, open, honest, frank discussion about who is best positioned to be the go-between the customer and staff. And I'm just throwing that out, and it's worthy of, you may have already discussed that, I don't know. But
to you, Chair Utley, Heidi DeVries, GM of People, Legislative Services and Planning. I think that's a really interesting concept, and certainly, especially in past days, we worked very, very closely with economic development, particularly Kevin Finney.
Yeah.
I know as that search happens, there are opportunities to look for personalities that will really sort of dovetail the work of economic development with what we're doing. But with one point of contact, you really do need people who have knowledge of our policies and and economic development is that higher level where they're really looking at the overall development of the city and incentivizing people to come to Brantford, which isn't that hard of a job anymore because people have figured out what we've known all along, that Brantford is the best place to grow, right? To grow your business and to grow your developments. But the one point of contact, I think we're really looking at a system where you have a lot of web-based, what you're seeing here, web-based applications, but behind that is supported by people with technical expertise who can answer your question across the scope of the permits that we were talking about. And just to the pool side, I mean, you would have to contact 3 different departments just to build a pool in Brantford. That's not the service model that we are going for. And certainly, we saw our CAO earlier, and I do speak with Brian on a regular basis. I think he speaks with everyone on a regular basis. And one of the things that we are looking at too is just, again, the place of economic development and the role of that department with respect to a number of different initiatives across the city. And I think you might see that play out in some really interesting ways, but we're happy to always take those ideas and take them back to the working table that we all sit around. So, thank you.
that's okay. Second round, Mayor Davis. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to echo what some of the observations by Councillor Carpenter and Councillor Utley in terms of staff. And what we're seeing here is, speaking in a more general sense, it's an evolution of the city's administration. It's a generational change, ramped up by COVID and everything COVID forced on the organization. But you're seeing younger managers with a different perspective who are being given the opportunity to do what it is I think needs to be done to improve the city, and also kind of a paradigm shift in looking at, and many bureaucracies do this, which is what benefits us and makes our job easier, to trying to look at issues like this from the perspective of the user, the resident, the developer, whoever it might be. And I think that's a really promising indication of more great things to come from this city organization, regardless, who is sitting on city council. I think that's embedded now into this organization for a lot of different reasons. So commend them very much and thank them very much as another example of great things we're doing. Another example is the work from home model. We're a model for municipalities across the province, across Canada now, because of what our staff have done and taken advantage of the opportunity that's presented. Now, back to the subject matter. One concern I have is, I don't know if it's legitimate or not, but it's based on some of the criticisms from the development industry, smaller developers, and they'd say they're on a site plan. What would end up coming back to me seemed to change. It would seem to depend on who it was I was talking to, and it might be different than the last time I did it. And it seemed to be a very subjective process rather than clear objective guidelines that are easy to understand and follow. And I'm a little bit worried that we're moving away from templates, and I get why, because we're going to use fewer, hopefully need fewer such agreements. But do we run the risk of a system that's too subjective? I mean, too dependent on the viewpoint of the staff person who is, assuming carriage of that particular file, and it might change from staff person to staff person, thus leading to the same kinds of complaints from the builders and developers, which boiled down to its essence is a lack of consistency and predictability. How do we guard against that? They're becoming too customized and too unpredictable.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. Through the chair to you, Mayor Davis, I feel the same concern through the engineering side of the development review. I've worked as a consultant in many municipalities, and one key component to those municipalities to be able to keep consistency was design guidelines and standards that have been set, so that all site plans, subdivisions, rezonings understand the requirements, such as the terms of reference for reports, the design elements of the site, and that allows the staff that are going to review it that guideline and checklist. So a part of the work plan that we submitted to the province was to better bolster our design guidelines and standards. We have a linear design manual and vertical design manuals through engineering services. They are really tailored towards subdivisions, where we need to really tailor our requirements to the site plan requirements. So again, it's a problem that I've seen myself trying to work with staff to keep the consistency, but we need these guidelines and standards like other municipalities have, so that developers understand this is the requirement. And so we know that we're drafting our drawings a certain way, designing our sites a certain way, and we know the city is going to review it that way because we are both reviewing the same document. That's something this municipality doesn't quite have compared to some of our other comparators around us.
Great, glad to hear that. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. Any other questions? Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councilor Carpenter, Councilor Sluss. Any discussion? I do want to say a couple of things. One is that this project is particularly proud that I've been involved with, and not proud for me, but I'm proud of you, the staff members, who've really taken this on and you're running with it. This is a huge first step and something I've been pushing for, I think, since my early election years. So I'm just so happy that, CI, whatever we want to call it, the organizations really embraced these techniques that are old by industrial standards, but fairly new for municipalities. So I think we're one of the leaders in the pack in the province to, to adopt these very worthwhile practices. It builds enthusiasm, teamwork, good results, better relationships with our community, our customers. And I think we can all, every one of us, council included, we can be very proud that we're setting a very high standard, a new standard, an exciting standard for our city. This will really help us, it'll help attract businesses and developers to our community because they know that it's an easy, accurate, timely city to deal with. So thank you all. And if there's nothing else, Tanya, would you please take the vote?
Certainly. So 4.1, those in favor, please. Councillor Utley, Councillor Sluss, Councillor Carpenter, Mayor Davis. Carries.
Thanks, everyone. That is wonderful, wonderful. Maybe I can sleep tonight now. So next item is 4.2, Planning Committee Pilot Project. And Nicole, you're on deck.
Yes, so I don't have a formal presentation for this one. I really just wanted to provide a bit of an introduction with this item. This concept first came forward when we were undertaking the DAP review with the consultant that was brought on as through the KPMG review. And it was this concept that the municipality really should kind of keep their finger on the pulse with respect to increases in planning applications and ensuring that not only are we sort of providing the engine with the fuel at the front end of that process, but really looking at applications from that like sort of cradle to grave type analogy where we look at the application intake right through to planning approvals through the statutory process. And so really just kind of keeping our finger on the pulse, we are seeing a significant increase in planning applications. So much so that you're evidence of that is the July cycle where we will have an additional meeting in July to accommodate planning applications. Within our current structure under planning and administration, or sort of COW, planning and administration, it's important to recognize that there are several other reports that make their way to that agenda that are just as pertinent to the corporation as planning matters. And so as a result of that, and given the time constraints, we often limit the amount of applications coming forward for statutory hearing to ensure that the committee has time to deal with the entirety of the agenda for that evening. So recognizing that and the limitations that does place on applications moving timely or quickly through that process, as part of the DAP implementation plan that was provided to the province, a key component is retention of temporary staff to assist in DAP improvements. So working jointly with Tanya, and she actually authored the majority of this report, and she's clerking today, but this really is her sort of report. But working closely with Tanya and looking at opportunities that we can improve capacity at the clerk's level, we actually put in for a position that was fully funded from the province for a dedicated clerk to assist in statutory hearings. We also heard from other members of council that they often hear, sometimes from delegates or even the development community, just frustration on the length of meetings and potentially the opportunity or the result that sometimes we have delegates waiting in the wings for several hours before they're able to come forward. So we thought that this was the timely opportunity to implement a pilot, since there will be very little cost to the corporation. The position will be funded through the provincial funding envelope. We've estimated that to be roughly $25,000. That will actually come forward as a separate matter to the HR committee at the July 5th meeting. But I do want to raise that here. So what we are proposing is a pilot program for a planning committee. It will run 7 cycles. I do want to acknowledge that as a result of the municipal election and how that has impacted our meeting cycle, we are recommending that we have meetings in September. So there is a schedule provided in the report. Meetings in September, then not again until December, January, February through to April. we are requesting a small budget to deal with the back end of this process. And that really just acknowledges some of the constraints that we have as a result of the election and the potential for so many members of council that will be coming on board, that there really should be an opportunity to experience the pilot before you're asked to make a decision on the pilot. And then just recognizing that the provincial funding does run out in February. Taking that into consideration with how we have to, under the Planning Act, provide notice. If we were to report back to this committee, we would actually have to probably prepare that report in December for this committee to hear it in January. That just really, we felt, isn't enough time to experience and work out any tweaks, so that when we come forward, we can hopefully do that in unison and present maybe a permanent process or a meeting schedule and cycle. And so we're asking that we have a small budget as part of this, so that way we can continue with the pilot through to April. And it allows us as planning staff, as well as the clerk, to understand how we're providing notice and what meeting we're asking people to come to and to delegate to, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, or sorry, Heidi.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Utley. I just want to add one thing. Approximately half a year ago, the city of Brantford had 2 task forces set up. One was to actually receive the report from our consultant with respect to the development approval process review, and the other was actually to look at our meeting structure and our meeting process review. And 2 reports came forward simultaneously. The meeting structure was set showing 2 committee of the wholes reporting into council. The second committee of the whole, which was going to be planning and administration, was to take on all of the planning hearings and other planning matters, as well as matters from the PLSP Commission and the CAO's Commission. The consultant report for DAP indicated that they would recommend a separate standalone planning meeting. And I believe it might have even been Councillor Sless who asked, how are you going to reconcile these 2 things? And our response was, we're going to see how it goes, and we will come back to you if we think that you're going to get into these compression issues with timing. And so here we are, faster than I think we might have anticipated, though we did know that the development applications in the city of Brantford were ramping up significantly. And we, again, timing, and Nicole's indicated this throughout this meeting, but with the funding from the province, we're able to present to you this pilot program, which we are very excited about. It's a cross-departmental initiative. And we think as well, to Mayor Davis's point, leveraging some of what we learned through the pandemic, the ability for people to participate in a hybrid way, which we see even in this meeting now, where members of the public who want to delegate do not have to sit through a 6-hour session in our council chambers. They can even be at work, get a notification if they want to delegate, send their comments in written format if they can't. And then also streamlining this process, understanding that the workload for members of council is significant for part-time councillors. So having representatives from each ward without requiring the full body to meet for planning hearings, again, hopefully will free up some time and allow for a more efficient meeting process. On top of that, when you talk about the development community, consultants who are paid well to represent developers at these meetings, sitting for 2 hours is not a good use of developers' resources either. Having those consultants being able to come in through a 9 to 5 workday, attend these meetings, again, either virtually or in person, we're hoping as well will create efficiencies on their end. So hopefully it's a win for the city, a win for the public, and a win for the developers. But I just did want to add to that. Usually I don't have to supplement anything Nicole Wilmot says, but I did just want to jump in because I'm very, very excited about this program. We are. Anyway.
Oh, it's great to see you all working together. So we've got, thank you both very much for your presentations and words. I didn't see whose hand went up first, but I want to go with Councillor Carpenter. You don't often start first, so I'll give you the opportunity.
Well, Councillor Sless was ahead of me, but that's okay. Thank you.
Was he? I'm sorry. I just didn't see.
Yeah, happy to speak to it. I'm pleased that we're moving this way. I think it's long overdue. The workload is just too much, and having to not get development approvals done in time because we can't meet. I really wasn't a fan of moving to a 3-week cycle council structure in the first place. I thought 4 weeks would have been more consistent, and it was more consistent for the public to know when we were on. Now it's just a guessing game for them. So many of them just give up watching. But this would be a good process for planning. I think it's a great way to. So the question that I would have would be, in the planning cycle, then the development proposal would have a window, maybe 1 hour or 2 hour window. Is that how you would see it? So they would know when to come on?
So through the chair, we can't actually limit the window of time when a certain development proposal may come forward, given that we have to hold a public hearing that allows for members of the public to speak and then members of council to ask questions. And so that would be very difficult, but we could potentially set up, especially with the additional clerking resource, maybe a notification system if people are waiting in the queue and they're at home. So these are some of the things we would love to be able to explore. But we wouldn't be able to say you only have 1 hour for this particular matter.
Right.
There may be ways when you get to council that you can restrict comments because the full opportunity to be heard has already been had, actually multiple opportunities. If you take into consideration the public meeting, usually ward meetings, and then the committee of the whole meetings. So that's being rolled out in other municipalities.
So those members of the public that didn't have an opportunity to speak to, say, a planning item, they couldn't attend on that day, or because it's in the day, or they could still speak at council, would they not?
Yeah, so we are looking at, we will be looking at some of those procedural bylaw changes through this pilot process. And we don't have an answer for that yet, but that's part of the pilot. I think one of the things that we want to be aware of is not necessarily recreating the statutory hearing process that generally happens at Cal, recreating that on the council floor, because I think then what we've done is we've actually just created a larger problem than actually streamlined the process. So we will be looking at that. One of the things I did want to sort of add to that, though, is myself and Tanya had a good opportunity to sit down with clerks and clerking staff across many municipalities who are all in the same boat of implementing these very similar type improvements. And we had a really good discussion at that meeting. And one of the things that they looked at was that they were looking at that gave us an opportunity of things to explore through this pilot is the potential of limiting the speaking opportunity at the council meeting to written submission. One of the things I also wanted to acknowledge was we all know that there are those certain applications that draw out a larger crowd, right? We just had that on the Grand River Ave application, right? But traditionally, that's not often where we receive comment, the majority of comment into the planning process. Our planners get majority of the comments through email, through phone calls, through the request for separate meetings, through the counselors bringing information to staff that you've heard from constituents, and the neighborhood meeting. Those are traditionally where we hear the majority of the input from the public. It's actually quite limited overall when you look at, the 12 months out of the year, how many delegates actually come out to speak at those meetings. So those are all things that we want to kind of monitor and take into consideration as we're evaluating the success of this pilot.
So it's possible then to have, say, a virtual speaker, a resident could maybe chime in virtually, and then that would be, and it could be before the meeting, anytime before the meeting of what their concerns are, and then that could be played at the actual meeting. Is that possible too?
That's interesting technology. Yes, absolutely. Those are all things that we can explore. I mean, really, that's an evolution of the email. Right now, it's a video. And that we're receiving, and that information could be provided to members of council. Through the pilot, we're not, and just also through the pilot, we're not recommending any change with respect to the hybrid function that we're currently already experiencing. This would just be the separate meeting.
If I could just add to, from a clerking resource spot, when you have now a dedicated clerking, they become a specialist in this area of focus. Whereas most of your clerking resources are generalists. We know the procedural bylaw, but we're generalists in the subject matter. This is now getting a connection to the planning matters that will help to be able to guide and join that working group of the other municipalities. And that will help us navigate this pilot process.
Okay, thank you very much. This is very exciting. I think it's long overdue too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Slice, thanks for your patience.
Not a problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really like this process as well. I think, has been said, planning hearings can get dragged out and take up the entire evening and maybe not even finish. So I think this is a step in the right direction. The concern I have with it is you're pretty much eliminating a counselor who works full time. You're now asking somebody to give up 1 day a month of their work schedule to attend this. So I think we have to be cognizant of that. There's a lot of folks that run for council that work full-time, and these two things don't mesh very well. So I don't know whether we're eliminating a large segment of the population who might want to participate because they can't because of work commitments. But I think that's something that we have to consider, probably not as this group, but as a council. We have to, I think, have a look at ourselves and how are we structured and how do we function, because this doesn't really mesh well with our current structure and our it just, they're at odds, because we're sort of saying to a large segment of the population, well, you could be on council, but perhaps you can't, because you're going to have to commit to things that are going to be very awkward for you to be able to do. So it would take a very patient person and a very patient employer to allow somebody to become a counselor. So I think that's something, staff are there all day, and I think it makes their life better because they're at work anyway, and now they're doing this during regular working hours as opposed to after working hours, and that part of it works well. The part to me that doesn't work well, again, is the person that's at work all day doing some other job and then comes in to become their counselor job, and now they're having a conflict there. So I think it's something to be cognizant of as we move forward. But the structure is, as I think Councillor Carpenter said, is long overdue. This is, to me, how it should be done. I think it's the right way to do it. You're just going to have to, staff will have to be patient while councillors each individually try and figure out how they can fit into this whole process, because it's going to become a little different for them. That's my nickel's worth. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Would it be possible to look at 2 half days instead of 1 full day? Just to make it easier for any councillor that is working, maybe a lot easier to get a half day off than a full day, and then break it up. Just something to consider. But I like it, support it. And are there any other questions, comments? Councillor Carpenter.
Yeah, just a comment on what Councillor Sless, he makes a good point, but we may have to look at, as he says, we'll have to look at the council structure. Maybe there's a stipend for those that if are working that day to compensate the loss of their pay if they're working full time and have to take those times off. I know that through my time as council, I've had to take use lots of holidays in lieu of when I was working full time, and I did that. But there may be another process. As Councillor Sless says, it's time we took a real serious look at our structure of council and how we've been working, and the size the city's growing to be and going to be, and how we're going to manage services going forward as councillors. I think that we didn't do it this time. We sort of just stuck with the status quo, but we should take a serious look next time. But this is a pilot project which will flush some of that stuff out for us to know for part of that discussion. So I'm excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I don't see any other hands up. I'm sorry.
Oh, through you, Chair Ellie, I did want to say, actually, Councillor Carpenter took the words out of my mouth. Staff share those concerns that Councillor Sless has raised and Councillor Carpenter has raised. That's why we are not proposing that this be a permanent amendment. It's also why we're not asking for amendments to our procedure bylaw right now to limit speaking opportunities at council. We really want to see how this goes. If we have trouble making quorum, how that works with a tag team approach for each ward. So if a councillor has to work that day, the other councillor can come in, and not every hearing date will be a full day. We're going to set aside the day. I know that makes it really difficult from a work planning perspective, because you have to prepare for perhaps 6 hours, even though you may only be there for 2. And so this is why we want to really watch that and report back. But we hear you, we share those concerns, and we also see the workload of councillors in this municipality increasing. And again, it's something that we're keeping our eye on as staff.
Thanks. Okay, I need a mover and a second, please. Councillor Carpenter, Councillor Sless. Any discussion? No, call the vote, please.
So just Chair Utley, so in clause B, item 3 is the composition. I'm not sure if Councillor Sless has a question, put his hand up.
Councillor Sless.
My hand up was to vote. Sorry.
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry. I just wanted to know if does the task force want to look at placing names, or do you want to leave that at the committee of the whole level when it goes? There are 2 ward two members here, so it doesn't work out evenly to place the task force as the initial members, but I just wanted to identify that we need an amendment here to identify the members. If not, we'll flag that for a committee of the whole when all members are present.
Yeah, I think we need all members present.
Certainly.
We can fill the mayor's position in, that's automatic.
So certainly we'll flag that then for the committee of the whole, we'll just
Thanks.
vote with this with the open spaces.
Thanks, Tanya.
No
Call the
problem.
vote, please.
Just to add to that though, filling the mayor's position is fine, but we may want to consider whether that's ex officio. I don't know where we're going to fill Mayor Davis's day with planning when he's got a pretty full schedule as it is, I would imagine. So we'll have to have some discussion about that. Thank you.
Okay.
So item 4.2 then, those in favor? Councillor Sluss, Councillor Carpenter, Mayor Davis, Councillor Utley. Item carries.
Thank you very much. I need a mover and a seconder for the journey 20 minutes. Councillor Carpenter and Councillor Sluss. Any discussion? All those in favor? Sorry.
Councillor Sluss, Carpenter, Mayor Davis, Councillor Utley.
Before we adjourn, there were no notices of motion. I just want to thank you all again, Josh, for your presentation, Nicole, for your presentation, all the great input that we had from everyone and from the councillors. I am super excited about this, that we really are pushing forward. We've seen real progress now. Already, we're seeing great relationship improvements with our business community, and it can only get better. So have a lovely day, and I'll see you at, is it Twisted
Indian.
Twisted Indian, Council Sluss.
Yeah, John, are you heading there from here or,
Yeah, might as well, yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
I will head over there then as well, John.
okay. Are you gonna be there?
See you there in a few minutes.
Okay, bye now, bye
Okay.
everyone.
See you later.
Thank you. Thanks everyone,
Thank you.
great stuff, really great stuff.